So how does a country girl who has grown up in a massive family with a very stripped back lifestyle end up in magazines? A completely different world.
By accident. I was a journalist in Melbourne, working for the Herald Sun, and I wrote a column. I shared a page with Andrew Bolt on a Friday.
No way.
Yeah. I think we were counterpoints to each other. I was positioned there very much on purpose.
My God.
I was also a restaurant reviewer for the Sunday magazine, and I wrote sort of celebrity features and so on for Sunday magazine. And the team at Cosmo, up at, it was ACP at the time in Sydney, had noticed my writing, because I used to write about sort of, pseudo left-wing feminist stuff, in part to really, get up Andrew Bolt's nose. But they noticed me. I was covering off topics that were sort of pertinent to Cosmo. They called me up a couple of times, and I decided to move to Sydney on a whim. Right. Within a month I was living up there, and within literally a couple of weeks I had the gig as editor of Cosmo.
So you went from writing columns to running this magazine?
Yeah, I'd never worked in magazines. I'd never even read Cosmo in my entire life.
Really?
I'd never worn makeup. I'd never worn high heel shoes. Not that I'm saying these things were prerequisites for the job, but I'd never managed a team before. So it was a baptism by fire. And I arrived in Sydney, which was a completely different city, and magazine culture, it's not quite what people sort of portray it as, but not far off. All of a sudden I was in this world of canapes and champagne and, stuff that I'd never even heard of or experienced. So it was a very intense part of my life. I was 29. And
which is super young to be a boss.
That's right. Yeah, so it was a very challenging time of my life, very rewarding, but in the end, I did burn out.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, my God, how could you not, being thrust into that? When you look back at your time in magazines, what are you the most proud of that you did at your 4 years at Cosmo?
One of the things I was really proud of is as an editor, staff leave, staff come. I hired some really wonderful young women who I think there was a little bit of a culture of hiring women from sort of a private school kind of circle within Sydney. There was a lot of that in magazines at the time. And I don't know what it was. It wasn't a concerted effort, but I wound up hiring a whole heap of young women who were from the country.
Right. Do you think you connected with them because that's where you'd come from?
I think so. It wasn't a concerted thing, but obviously there was some subliminal leaning towards women who'd come from nothing and who were really eager. They weren't glamorous types. But they had eyes wide open, and they were hard workers, and they really cared. So there was a bunch, I'd say sort of half a dozen young women I hired during that time who, as an assistant, and then moved on up the ranks. And I'm glad I was able to give them that start. And watch them as they've travelled around the world and done their thing. So that was something
awesome.
And I guess also, during that time, 4 years, some of the issues that I covered off, having a news background, I hope, had sort of translated. I did quite a big campaign with the 2007 election, trying to get women engaged in the voting process. So I interviewed John Howard and Kevin Rudd at the time, who was, opposition leader, and just tried to get them engaged in what young women were thinking about. I was considered mad at the time for doing for trying to get politics into Cosmo. But I hope it had some impact.